Welcome back, everyone. Today I wanted to do another installment of Introduction to Insect Taxonomy and Identification, kind of a random one because I'm not going on to the Dermaptera and the grasshoppers this time. I wanted to talk about modern snakeflies, the Raphidioptera. So in the tree of life, where are the Raphidioptera? We have the Entonatha, we have the apterate insects, so no wings here, and these are the pseudo insects. And then we have the Archeonatha. So these are the mayflies and the Paleoptera, I'm sorry. These are the mayflies and dragonflies they are insects with wings, but haven't yet figured out how to fold their wings compactly. So after that, we have the Neoptera. And these are the hemimetabolous insects. They don't go through a complete metamorphosis, but they have figured out how to fold their wings behind them. So this group has nymphs instead of larvae, and they don't have a pupal stage. And the Raphidioptera are way down here. And at this point here, you have the hemimetabolous insects up there, and down here are the holometabolous insects. Metabolous, if I can spell. And these are the insects that actually go through pupation. So they go from egg to larva to pupa to adult. And they too are Neoptera in that they can fold their wings behind them. And the most primitive of these groups are here, the Neuroptera, the Megaloptera, and the Raphidioptera. Once upon a time, these three orders were all combined into one, but eventually more evidence came out that they were all separate orders, but their exact relationship is not clear. So the Raphidioptera are here at the bottom of this triumvirate. And these are the snakeflies, the modern snakeflies. So those are what I wanted to talk about today. So modern snakeflies are a little strange in that they are Neoptera, yes, holometabolous, yes, but they are a little weird. They're primitive. They're living fossils. There are only two families that currently exist within the Raphidioptera. Both of them can be found in North America, but the vast majority of their families, the families of this order, are extinct. And if you go into the fossil record, the peak of this group occurred in the Cretaceous, and they have been declining ever since. Common characteristics: they tend to have highly venated wings. They have an elongated thorax for predation, and this is where they get their name for the snakeflies. The females tend to have very, very long ovipositors, which they use to lay their eggs into cryptic locations. They're primarily found, or they are only found really at this point, in the northern hemisphere, and primarily found in temperate locations. In areas which are more tropical or subtropical, they tend to be limited to higher elevations because part of their life cycle requires cold temperature. So of these two families, both of them can be found within North America. They are primarily found west of the Rocky Mountains, but there are examples of all of them on the continent. There are 260 species worldwide, and within the US and Canada, there's about 22 species, but only 3 genera. So they're not that diverse, not that difficult to tell apart. The larvae tend to be predators. And they'll either be found associated with trees and shrubs or generally associated with topsoil and debris. And they are very, very long-lived. So they spend a lot of time in their larval state before becoming adults. And then the adults also tend to be predators, but some of the species will also feed on things like nectar and pollen. Of these two groups, the Raphidiidae are the most common in North America, with 19 species across 2 genera. But the only 2 genera are Agula and Alina, which look very, very similar, but there are some key ways of telling them apart. And then for the Inocelliidae, there's only the one genus of Nega, one genus with 3 species. So not a hard group to learn at all if you are in North America. So let's get into these 2 groups. So the first group, the Raphidiidae, this is what they look like. And there are 2 genera with 19 species in North America. These are frequently referred to as the typical snakeflies. Some key characteristics that will allow you to distinguish them from the Inocelliidae are This group here do have ocelli present on the top of the head, the three simple lenses that aid with vision while flying. This group has a pterostigma on the forewing, and that forewing pterostigma has a veinlet that runs through it. Additionally, this pterostigma tends to be in a lighter color, so it's frequently like a brown yellow versus a darker color in the Inocelliids. The head tends to be kite-shaped, meaning that it kind of has a elongated hexagonal shape, whereas the other group tends to be more rectangular. And the larvae of this group tend to live in the topsoil or ground debris, and they spend very little time as a group underneath the bark of trees. In this group, there are two genera. There's Agula that has 17 species in North America, and Alina, which has 2 species. So this is an example of Agula, looking at it from the top down. The difference between these two genera is that Agula tends to be a little larger than Alina, and there are definite wing venation differences. So Agula tends to have more wing venation, more branch veins, and it also tends to have a larger pterostigma. So if we look at like the wings here, if you look at this region, you'll see lots and lots of veins. And then also the pterostigma tends to be a little longer. And then if you look at something like Alina here, this is the forewing, you have fewer cross veins and branch veins here, and the pterostigma tends to be considerably smaller. So again, if you look at that, you can definitely see some differences here. So the two groups are relatively easy to tell apart. So Alina is smaller, has fewer wing veins, has a smaller pterostigma, and Agula has the larger pterostigma, more veins, and tends to be a bit larger. And those are the only two genera. With species, you'd have to get a key to species to tell them all apart. The other group are the Inocelliids, and this is a much smaller group, obviously. They only have one genus within North America, and of that genus, there's only 3 species, all of them within the genus Nega. The Inocelliids tend to have a square head. So, and this group is kind of referred to as the square-headed snakeflies. They have no ocelli. Their wings, while having a pterostigma, do not have a veinlet through the pterostigma, and the pterostigma tends to be darker. It tends to have a much darker color, so like a dark brown or a black, compared to the Raphidiids, which are kind of a brownish yellow. And their antennae tend to be much longer and thicker. With this group, the larvae tend to specifically live under the bark of trees. So you're not going to find them as frequently in the topsoil or in leaf debris, things like that on the ground. So that's it. Those are the only 2 families. Things that you should keep in mind with the Raphidioptera that make them kind of weird. They have a very long life cycle, or they tend to have a very long life cycle. The egg can take up to 3 weeks to hatch. The larvae can kind of putter around for 2 to 3 years. In the lab, sometimes it can take up to 6 years to get them through their larval stage. And that can be between 10 and 15 molts to get through the larval stage, which is really a large number for a holometabolous insect. The pupa can take up to 3 weeks to go to fully pupate into the adult stage. This is what the larvae look like. So they'll putter around like this for a couple of years. 2 to 3, sometimes up to 6, where they are predaceous, and then they will pupate, and they'll be in this pupa for a couple weeks. So 2 to 3 weeks, and they will only pupate with the initiation of a cold snap. This is what I was referring to earlier about needing cold temperatures. The cold is what initiates this development into adulthood. The pupae are a little weird, and this is kind of a primitive state for the pupae. The pupae are capable of walking, and they're also capable of biting. So it's not like with caterpillars or beetles or things like that, where the limbs tend to be, fixed to the body. The head tends to be completely sealed off. These can still move around and can still bite while they're pupating. And then the adult lifespan is variable. So they're a really interesting group, but you're not likely to see them around very much, unfortunately. And if you do find the larvae, if you want to add an adult to your collection, you're going to have to spend a couple of years raising it. But that's the group, and I'll talk to you guys later.